Welcome to Coffee and Capital with Adam Dakin. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned this morning, we are joined by Adam Dakin of Dreamit Ventures. Adam serves as the managing director for Dreamit, where he leads the HealthTech vertical focused on seed and Series A digital health and medtech companies. He co-founded 5 technology companies that have collectively raised over $60 million in early stage capital. Adam serves on the boards of Safkan Health and Right Air, and he is an active angel investor. Adam was named an inventor on 7 US patents, and he holds a BSc from the Wharton School and an MBA from UCLA. Adam joins us today to answer your questions about finding funding, the investment process, or other things in that world that might be on your mind. So really appreciate his time and sharing his insight with us this morning. And with that, I give you Adam Dakin.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Thanks very much for the invitation. Pleasure to be here. Jake did a pretty nice job there covering my background, so I probably don't need to go into too much more detail, but there's certainly more information on LinkedIn. And I encourage you to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already connected. So, yeah, 25 plus years doing early stage health tech, venture backed companies. Those companies that Jake mentioned, we raised venture money for all of them, right around $60 million across those 5 companies. I was the CEO of 3 of them. I wasn't the CEO of all 5 companies. A couple of them went well, a couple of them did not. And one in particular that still keeps me up at night. But I guess that's the nature of doing startups. My background is mostly med tech, but then a couple of years ago I moved over to Dreamit, and now I've really been immersed much more in the digital health world, which is very different. Everyone sort of puts this stuff under the umbrella of health tech, but really, it might as well be aerospace and housing when you talk about the difference between medical technology and digital health. I mean, everything about the business models, the vocabulary, the customers, completely different universes. So had a pretty steep learning curve to get up when I got to Dreamit. Actually, it's been almost 3 years now when I transitioned over to Dreamit. How many of you, we've got a few of you on camera. It'd be great if the other folks, assuming you don't have bedhead or you're not in your pajamas, if you turn your cameras on, that would be great, because I may ask a couple of questions along the way here. So a couple of things. One, how many of you had heard of Dreamit before, this event or, seeing the announcement from Jake? So we have maybe a few folks out there who didn't know Dreamit. Okay. And are you all sort of Philadelphia based, or some of you from outside the region? Pretty much. Is it how about that? If you're not from the Philly area. So it's I guess we're pretty Philly centric here.
We're based in Delaware.
Delaware. That still counts as Philly. You don't have your own. You're an Eagles fan, so you're from Philadelphia. Okay, well that's helpful. And background-wise, are you entrepreneurs and startups? Maybe half head nods. Those of you who are not startups, are large corporate companies, lawyers, accountants, attorneys. Yep. Okay. That's helpful, and thank you all of you for coming on camera. I appreciate that. It is easier. These things are awkward to begin with, but makes it a little bit easier when you can sort of look people in the eye through the virtual interaction. So a little bit, I'll give you the thumbnail on Dreamit. We are a Philadelphia-based venture fund, but we're very different from traditional venture funds in that our model really is tied to what you might loosely call an accelerator. We try to stay away from that terminology because there's a certain connotation associated with accelerators that doesn't really describe what we do and doesn't really describe our business model. But that's how people tend to think of us. And that program, we prefer to refer to it as a growth program because we're working with companies that are really all about scaling and commercializing. So I'm assuming most of you are familiar with kind of the, the big brands in the accelerator world are the Techstars or the Y Combinators. Their model is different. They're working with earlier stage companies. They get a pretty sizable chunk of equity, anywhere between 6 and 10%. Startup Health is in that category, New York-based HealthTech accelerator. So they're getting a pretty sizable chunk of equity to work with the companies and take them kind of through their programs. We get a very small amount of equity, and our program, the growth platform, is it's a 3 to 9 month program. There's no co-location. It's done all virtual, except during normal times when we're visiting actual customers or when we're visiting investors together. Now, of course, we have to do all that virtual. But it's a very customized program. We're working with a very small number of companies, 6 to 8 companies at any one time. And we have 2 other verticals. We have we have a secure tech and an urban tech vertical as well. Model is exactly the same in those other verticals. So we run this growth program, and the goal there is to accelerate customer acquisition, pure and simple. On the health side, we've got about 70 stakeholder partners now. We're really known for our sort of our relationships into enterprise healthcare systems, though we also have relationships with payers, big pharma partners, and a few multinationals sprinkled in there as well. But what's unique is we get red carpet access into these organizations because they know we're bringing them very, very high caliber, very well vetted, and very well rehearsed companies before they get the pitch. Of the 6 to 8 companies we work with at any given time, those were selected from typically maybe about 400 companies that apply to the program. So we're pretty selective, and the reason we're so selective is because at the end of the day, when a company joins Dreamit, we assume we're going to be investing in them. So again, it's a venture model. The other part of the program that's really the other key pillar of the program is what we call investor sprints. The first piece is what we call customer sprints. And across that 2 week of customer sprints, we'll get our companies in front of between 20 and 30 potential customers. And we work really hard to find the right decision makers within those organizations that align with your particular platform. Many of you probably know, particularly if you have any experience selling into enterprise health, how hard it is to identify who the decision makers actually are. Title means nothing in an enterprise healthcare system. The chief medical officer in one healthcare system might be the decision maker. At another healthcare system, they could have nothing to do with your platform or your decision. Right? It tends to be a very complex, bureaucratic system. One of our companies sold a product to Penn Medicine. It took them 18 months, and there were 35 decision makers in that CEO's CRM, and 5 of those 35 had veto authority, right? So imagine trying to close that sale. It's like trying to dance through raindrops, right? You wake up one morning and someone raised their hand and says, "I'm out, your deal's gone." So we sort of pride ourselves in helping companies navigate that gauntlet, that complexity of decision makers, by figuring out who is the right person. Because even once you figure out who that right person is, I mean, imagine you're standing in front of Penn Medicine. You're not even sure which door to walk into to sell your platform. Once you kind of figure that out, you're like, oh, okay, I need to get to Roy Rosen, Chief Innovation Officer. Great. It's going to take you 6 months or a year to get a meeting with Roy, right? He's getting 100 emails a week from startups that want to meet with him. So we are able to get our companies in front of those decision makers and save them that sort of 6, 9, sometimes even 12 months off the front end of the sales cycle by getting that sort of red carpet access. So that's a key pillar, value prop of the Dreamit program. And then the other key pillar is what we call investor sprints. We have a network now of about 1,000 venture funds that we co-invest with. And we'll send out an announcement every time we have a new cohort. These funds are both on the East Coast and the West Coast. They'll look through that cohort, decide which companies align with their thesis, and then they'll say, hey, Dreamit, now if you're doing this in person, when you're in San Francisco, these are the 4 Dreamit companies we want to meet with. Of course, right now we do it all virtual. But it's a very efficient, streamlined process because our companies are only talking to funds that want to talk to them. So they've read your summary, they know what space you're in, they know what stage you're at, they know how much capital you're raising. like, yes, that's a company we could invest in. We want to talk to them. So this most recent cohort, our teams had an average of 36 meetings with venture funds. One team had 46 meetings. So it's and that's across 2 weeks. So it's a very intense but very efficient process. We also spend a lot of time getting the companies game ready for those pitches. You know, if you ever see a Dreamit company pitch, it's tight, right? You're not guessing what the value prop is. You're not guessing what the ask is. You're not guessing who their competition is. It's all spelled out in a very clean, crisp format. And I really encourage those of you, if you haven't sort of plugged into some of our social media stuff, one of my partners has done a series of what we call Dreamit doses. I've done a handful of them as well. They're really terrific in terms of how do I present my competition slide, right? How do I present my market size slide? We see companies screw this stuff up all day, every day. It's really easy to fix. So if you haven't done so already, there's a series of these 5-minute, go to dreamit.com doses on the link. There's a bunch of these which are just incredibly valuable. I really wish I had seen a lot of, I would have avoided a lot of my pitching mistakes, because across 25 years of startups, I guarantee you I've driven into every single minefield that you can possibly imagine, screwed up. I go back now and look at some of my early pitch decks, can't believe how bad they were. We're pretty good at it. Those interactions with investors, about half of our companies close rounds within 6 months of getting through Dreamit. And then we co-invest in the vast majority of those deals. So to be clear, we don't lead rounds, but we work like mad to help our companies find lead investors so that we get the opportunity to co-invest alongside of those lead investors. So we're not setting terms, we're not taking board seats. We just want the opportunity, and we get the actual right to invest a minimum of $500,000 in any company that goes through Dreamit. By HealthTech, it's really tightly defined. I should have mentioned that earlier, but it's tightly defined as medtech or medical devices, diagnostics too, a handful, and digital health. We don't do biotech or pharma, life sciences. That's just beyond sort of the scope of what we define as our health tech vertical. And compared to other organizations, accelerators, if you will, they have funding rates that typically run in the 10 to 15% range. The fact that we're about 50% of our companies getting funded is a pretty good number. And that is our KPI, because at the end of the day, we make money as a venture fund. We don't make money by getting lots of equity. It's not, for us, it is not a shots on goal game. We're not trying to get, butts in the seats and get equity in lots and lots of startups, knowing that a handful of them are going to be successful. It's quite the opposite. We're fully invested in every single company. We really want them to scale and create value so that we get the opportunity to invest in them. So that's the kind of the high level overview of Dreamit and what we do. Happy to take the conversation in, we could talk about the state of the health tech market, what the trends are. We could talk about specific questions you have about your platforms and your fundraising. We can, any place that you all want to take the conversation, just fire when ready. So go ahead, Julia. I think you.
I've got a weird question that combines the two things you're talking about in terms of like digital health and SaaS leading a lot of entrepreneurship talk and medtech. What would you say is the customer acquisition cost for a B2B like hospital sales cycle?
So it's a really important question, and it's amazing how many companies don't actually put the thought into, so the CAC or customer acquisition cost is really, really important, especially important for a digital health platform, but true for medtech as well. So the answer is it takes a fair amount of data to actually figure that out and come up with a real number. But what I can tell you is the typical sales cycle for an enterprise healthcare system is 12 to 24 months.
Yeah.
And that's, it's expensive because you have so many decision makers involved in any one, particularly with software, right? If you're selling a device, you probably have a smaller universe of decision makers. So maybe you have a device for surgery, and the chief of cardiac thoracic surgery wants your device. He's got to convince the administration. He's got to get through a couple of value assessment, the VAT committee, right? But it's a relatively straightforward process. It's not a painless process, but it's reasonably defined. On the other hand, when you're selling software to a healthcare system, it's completely undefined.
Yeah.
You know, we always say when you've sold to one enterprise healthcare system, you've sold to one enterprise healthcare system, because the decision makers and the process and where the budget comes from is different in every healthcare system. So it's lengthy. And another venture guy, I don't know if you guys know Gary Kurtzman from Safeguard, but Gary is all about the fact that most digital health companies are severely underfunded because they don't anticipate properly how long that sales cycle is going to be. And we see it all the time. I mean, companies put projections up in front of us. Oh, when did you start the conversation? Well, we started the conversation with Penn and we think we'll have the deal closed in 9 months. No, you won't. And you can imagine, like, if you take your 9-month sales cycle and turn it into 18 months, imagine what that does to your cash flow projections and your capital requirements, right? But that's really the right way to do the projection. So I don't know if I specifically asked your CAC question, but the really good companies that we work with, they keep track of this data, and they can tell you once they've been out selling for a while, they can tell you exactly what the average sales cycle was. They can tell you exactly how much they spent to get those customers, and then how much it costs to maintain those customers as well, right? Investors, you may not get pressed on this from seed investors, but you definitely will get pressed on this from Series A investors. There's some noise in the background here. I hope it's not overwhelming.
Nature. I'm kidding.
No, I think one of my neighbors might be cutting his yard or something. If it gets too loud, I'll change location.
Yeah, no, that was helpful just to get some benchmarks of it is a very individualized process, and half the people I talked to was like, we haven't finished the process yet, so I can't tell you. I'm like, okay. So that's what it is.
What does your company do?
Oh, sorry, I didn't do the intro. Julia, working on Headway Surgical, which is a hands-free on-screen pointer for improving surgical team communication in minimally invasive surgery. So product-based, but we're at a low CapEx, like below that additional review of more committees, razor and blades model, so that as long as we're in, hopefully we get some recurring revenue. We know the decision makers at Penn, but not necessarily anywhere else. And when we ask other surgeons, they also don't know the decision makers from like a product-centric point of view in their hospital systems. So just trying to understand what the different makeups are. And like you said, it's just different at every hospital. So that's fun. It's a good time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points you made is super, super important, which is stay out of the capital budget, right? Like as an investor, when we see a company that's selling capital to a healthcare system, we have an immediate allergic reaction. It's like, oh no, you have to get capital budget committee approval. It's not coming out of an operating budget. So you really want to sell blades, not razors. Because again, it's already a long sales cycle, but it's an even longer sales cycle if you have to sell capital. So you want to, again, when you're thinking about business models and how to fund a company, you want to fund it so that you can get that capital cost down as low as you possibly can and put you in a position where you're either able to give it away or supply it at a low cost where you stay within the operating budget.
Hey, this is Troy. Julia, maybe some of the friction, maybe because of the focus that big hospital systems have right now. Have you considered looking? I'm sorry, Troy Wilford. I've been in medtech for over 20 years. Right now, I'm an independent consultant, helping startup companies. And I'm wondering if you may have some success going into ASCs, as you're trying to get some traction there, as opposed to going to some of the bigger hospital systems. So, just a thought, because again, the pathway is fraught with fewer obstacles. Your decision makers are pretty well defined, and the process is pretty well defined. So I just wanted to know if you had thought about that.
I just sent you a message out on LinkedIn because we need to talk about the different strategies. We've considered endoscopy in outpatient endo suites. We've considered ORs and just getting into the heart of, hospitals, and then ambulatory surgical centers are another possibility. We've just been tailored based off of who we think we can get as strong surgical support or strong clinician support, because we're not MDs.
No worries, and many of them have privileges, at some of the hospitals. So it might be exactly. So let's chat offline.
Yeah, it raises a really good point, Troy, and this is something we talk about a lot, right? So one, we tell our companies, and again, there's a Dreamit dose on this. It's how to be clever on more than one axis, right? And you have to be clever, not just the product itself. You have to be really clever on your go-to-market strategy. I did not appreciate until I got to Dreamit. I was really a pure med tech guy, and go-to-market strategies, when I started out, were less important. We kind of knew the decision makers were. We knew what budget we had to get to. But now the world has definitely changed, and the go-to-market is equally as important, and I would say in software, maybe even more important than the product itself. So being clever on more than one axis very much includes who your target customer is and what your go-to-market strategy is and what your pricing model is. And to Troy's point, we encourage companies all the time. It's like, look at those adjacent markets like SNFs, like ASCs, retail care clinics, urgent care clinics, places where you might be able to get traction early and faster that have much shorter sales cycles. You may not get as large a contract as you would get with a big enterprise healthcare system, but that's going whale fishing, right? Yeah, you might land the whale. Going to take you a long time. You're going to have to put a lot of gas in your boat. You're going to be going out into the ocean for days, weeks. Why not fish off the pier, right? Cost you a lot less. You'll catch some fish. You'll get to eat, right? You'll show investors some early traction. So the smaller, the independent practices, clinics, smaller physician clinics, if you can sell into those less sort of bureaucratic systems or customers that can make decisions a whole lot faster. For example, most of you probably know, we have St. Luke's Health up the road in Allentown, in the Allentown, Quakertown region. I think they just opened up their 6th hospital. It is so much easier to sell to them than it is to sell to Penn Medicine, right? So a lot of companies go logo hunting, and they want the Penns and the Stanfords and the Jeffersons to put up on that traction slide. But investors care a whole lot less about that and a whole lot more about actual traction. Do you have real customers who love your product? And where you're getting some early signs of market validation, market acceptance, your business model is working, your pricing is working. Nothing is more powerful for an investor to pick up the phone, call a customer who says, I love this, and I'm going to scale it, right? Land and expand. Yeah, we started at 1 hospital, but this has worked fantastic. Can't wait to get it to the other 5. That's a heck of a lot more powerful than saying, oh, we've had 5 meetings at Penn and it's moving through the process and it's going to be a $300,000 contract. Yeah, but they haven't signed yet. So it doesn't really mean much. So, being clever on more than one axis, look at adjacent markets that you can sell into where you can get traction, quickly. Go ahead, John.
Hey, so John Zakowski, Capsule Biologics. I'd just be interested to know a bit about the process of how you all go from the 400 or so applicants down to your 6 or 8, of how that whittling process goes and what it looks like.
Sure. So yeah, it's it's art and science, obviously. So part of it is, the top of the funnel is just, do you fit into those verticals that I described? If you're not a medical device, a diagnostic, or a digital health, you're out. So we probably screen out maybe 20% of those companies because they're just not really a fit. We don't do consumer either. So it might be a health tech device that's really interesting. But if the go-to-market is consumer focused, that doesn't fit. We don't have the expertise to help a company on the consumer side. Also, consumer platforms tend to be very capital intensive. We're a seed and Series A investor. So while, a company might be the next Uber or the next Google, it's going to take a lot of money to get there. And so from an investment thesis standpoint, it's more challenging, to be a seed or Series A investor in capital intensive businesses. So that starts the process. Then we're really looking for companies that are truly ready to commercialize. So they're kind of past product market fit. We get a lot of companies that we're really excited about, great teams, great platforms, but they're just too early. They haven't shown any traction at all yet. And we need some validation, some proof that the product actually works. It doesn't have to be a lot, If you have a handful of pilots, but they're going great and the customers love it, that may be enough for us. But because our model depends on finding a co-investor, typically a late seed or Series A institutional investor, I could tell you in the digital health world, you can't get funded if you don't have some revenue. You can get earlier funding in the med tech world because you can create value with patents and product and clinical data and KOLs who are behind the product. But in the digital health world, if you don't have customers, you haven't created value, right? The reality is, a couple folks on a laptop over a sprint weekend, hacking out software can actually make something that looks pretty good. But to an investor, we have no way, in a very crowded space, we have no way of knowing whether or not that's really valuable unless customers use it and like it. And really, the bar keeps going up. But in the digital health world, if you don't have $1 to $2 million of recurring revenue, it's going to be very difficult to get a conversation with an institutional investor. And you'll recall, the Dreamit model is to co-invest alongside institutional investors. So we can love a platform, but if it's realistically 18 months away from Series A, we won't get the opportunity to invest until that time, and we have to deploy our capital. We're a $50 million fund. We got 4 years to get it invested. We see early companies that are awesome, but we've got to get our money, hopefully, into those companies within 6 months. So it's tough for us to do. Now, on rare occasion, we will do, a flyer. We'll take a company. It's portfolio balancing, right? So if we have, every now and again, we can take a really early stage company. More often than not, though, it's a business development relationship where we start the dialogue now, and we keep the discussion going until the company gets further along. There's a Philadelphia company some of you may know called NeuroFlow. NeuroFlow just raised a $7 million Series A behavioral health platform, terrific team, terrific platform, exactly what the world needs right now. COVID is the wind at their back, sort of remote engagement with patients for wellness and mental health. They applied to Dreamit 3 times, and they got in on the third try because they just weren't far enough along. But they kept working at it. They eventually got some customers. They landed Jefferson and the Navy and a few other customers to get going. That was enough market validation for us to get excited about them. So there's circling back to your original question, John. There's a lot of art involved in try to find those 6 to 8 companies that we believe are institutionally financeable within a reasonable time frame. So they're far enough along that they're either in market or they're about to be in market. And then differentiation is the other part of this that's just really hard. If you're a digital health investor, the barriers to entry are very low. It's software, right? So it's there. For every company we look at, there's probably at least 10 or 15 other companies we've seen that have very similar platforms. So it's really hard to know which one is, like, you can look at a space and go, there's definitely going to be some winners in this space. But trying to figure out which ones are going to be those winners, that's really hard. So you kind of have to rely on some customer traction to at least sort of wean down the field to a manageable number. But I think that's the hard part. If you're in the digital health world, you need to be beating investors over the head right up front in the first 2 minutes of your pitch with, we are different, we're better, and here's how. I will say we probably talk to 2 or 3 chronic disease management companies a week, right? It's 70% of CMS's budget. Like 2/3 of CMS patients, Center for Medicare, Medicaid Services, right? Everybody over 65 is on Medicare. 2/3 of their patients have 2 or more chronic diseases, right? So hypertension, diabetes, obesity, COPD, that drives each. So it's a huge opportunity to move the cost curve if we could manage those diseases and keep those patients out of the hospital. And remote monitoring is a really hot space right now. But there are so many companies trying to solve that problem. So it's really hard to break through the noise and make it. If you're pitching for funding, how do you tell a story that differentiates you from the dozens, literally hundreds of other companies that are out there doing something pretty similar? And that can't emphasize enough that, you know, you sort of, when all of you are out pitching, you know, you really got 1 to 2 minutes at the beginning to get an investor's attention. If you lose them after that, you know, they're reaching for their smartphones and you're not going to get them back. So it's so critical to make that value prop and the differentiation crystal clear at the beginning of the pitch. It's why, again, if you've seen the Dreamit dose on this, we talk about a snapshot slide. We really like it when a company right up front at the very beginning of the pitch says, here's what makes us great and here's how we're different. Rather than us having to wait till, you know, 10, 15 minutes into the pitch and your 12th slide where you start talking about, you know, oh, here's the problem. No, you know, we probably understand the problem. We've looked at so many. Get to what makes you different. That's what's so critical. And I think a lot of companies don't, you know, they just don't get to it early enough.
Hey, Adam. Yeah, so I have a question. We on the digital health front, we have basically a real-time data management platform. We have proved our mettle on in the consumer space, where we collect a lot of data from smartwatches and smart Wear from both Google and Google Wear, as well as from iOS Apple Watch series. So that data is in petabytes, you know, that comes into our data management platform where we do real-time analysis. So what is one of the use cases that we're focusing is the patient outcomes. So my question to you is, what kind of a catalyst have you seen? Like what kind of an acceleration have you seen for adoption of digital health technology, especially around patient outcomes due to the COVID crisis? I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, so COVID has changed the rules in a lot of different ways. You know, some are transient, some are sustainable. The most obvious one, I'm sure everybody knows, right, is this rapid transformation to telehealth and virtual care. That was a transformation that was happening, albeit slowly, because there were a lot of resistant forces against going to telehealth and virtual. Consumers weren't totally comfortable with it. I think there was an issue there. People like sitting, you know, being in front of the doctor with the white coat and having the doctor put his hands on you, especially the older generation. I think, you know, that's how they're used to interacting with physicians. So they were reluctant to do it. The other factor was there was a bunch of reimbursement issues around telehealth. You know, the physicians had to be licensed state by state. They got paid a whole lot less for doing a telehealth visit, so they would rather just have you come to the office and make more money. Those of all that, the door has been kicked down. You know, docs get paid as much for a virtual visit now. They can practice anywhere. Probably this stuff will continue past the pandemic. Nobody knows for sure. But those have made sort of, for almost any enterprise healthcare system, one of their top priorities now is virtual care, right? The hospital at home, figuring out how to deliver, because you know, that's the most cost-effective setting if you can figure out how to leverage technology and deliver good care and good outcomes and keep patients in their home. And obviously patients don't want to go somewhere nowadays to get the care. So if you can generate the data that enables, you know, providers to track, monitor, and deliver care to patients in their homes, that's huge. The trick, however, is to prove that generates an improved outcome and an ROI. That's where a lot of companies fall down. They're like, oh, this is awesome. And it just makes sense that if we can monitor your blood pressure and your pulse oximetry and your weight, and we can do that in real time, and we can run some algos on it, right? It just makes sense if we can give that information to providers in real time, that for sure we're going to keep these patients out of the hospital. Well, maybe it makes sense, but you got to prove it. You have to prove an ROI. That's the one thing that has really changed about the pandemic. I was just on the phone with the head of innovation the other day for Atrium Health, big healthcare system in North Carolina. They're a great partner of Dreamit's. They always meet with our companies. And the first thing he said to me at the beginning of the call was, it's all about cost and capital letters, right? They've lost hundreds of millions. Most healthcare systems are under massive budget pressure right now. So if you show up to those healthcare systems, you better have a crisp ROI argument. right? Because somebody at that hospital would say,
Yeah.
if I spend $1 on you, I better get $5 back. And it's amazing how many companies just hand wave around, well, you know, COPD patients, they have a 25% readmission rate. And if we can keep track of them at the home, and if somebody can call them when they're a rising risk patient, you know, and make sure they're more adherent to taking their medications, you know, it's for sure we're going to keep those patients out of the hospital. No, it's not. It's not. Nothing's for sure in healthcare. You have to prove it. Do the hard work, do the studies, and prove that you're actually delivering a real ROI back to whoever it is that's paying for your particular platform. Because there's so many things in healthcare that seem obvious and intuitive, but the wild card is always the patient, and patients are non-adherent, right? I mean, COPD patients are notoriously difficult. You know, 25% of them end up back in the hospital within 30 days of discharge. Well, that's multifactorial, and there's a lot more to it than just keeping an eye on them at home, right? I mean, notoriously non-adherent patient population. It's a patient population that won't take their meds. They only use rescue inhalers. Many of those patients won't use the meds that will make them feel better in the long term because they don't make them feel better in the short term. So there's so many variables that come into play when you're making a claim around a better outcome. Figure out what that endpoint is, and then do the work. Do a study, you know, to prove that you actually impact that endpoint in a meaningful way, and then build out a real ROI model, right? And figure out what the cost drivers, and they're different in different systems. If I'm in an integrated delivery network, in other words, if I'm in a system where the payer and the provider are the same entity, like you know, like the VA system, or like a Geisinger. Geisinger has their own health plan, or Intermountain Health, right? Or a Kaiser. The math there is different for them, as opposed to a Penn Medicine, which is predominantly a fee-for-service system, right? So Penn is getting, every time the patient shows up, Penn's getting paid. You know, their economic models are very different from the system where I pay for you and I care for you. In that system, I really want preventive medicine matters to me. I want to keep you healthy because I'm going to bear those costs when you get sick. In a fee-for-service system, not so much, right? You show up to my ER, I do a surgery on you, I get paid. Now, there are some checks and balances, right? Penn has a deal, most of you may know, with Independence Blue Cross, right? It's the readmission guarantee. If a patient comes back to Penn within 30 days after surgery, IBX, Independence Blue Cross, they're not paying. That's the deal. You know, you got to get them out. You got to keep them healthy. If they come back, that's on you. So that motivates so Penn's going to be excited about certain platforms, particularly ones that lower readmissions in that 30-day period. They probably don't care about lowering readmissions in a 90-day period, because that patient comes back at 90 days, cha-ching, they get paid again. On the other hand, Geisinger does not want that patient coming back because they are the payer for that patient no matter what happens. So it's really important as you think about, you know, your go-to-markets, your ROIs, to think about what the economics are for that particular healthcare system or that buyer.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very useful insight.
Well, Adam, I'm just curious after, you know, his question about pandemic's effect. How has the pandemic affected the work at Dreamit and investing? Were things slowed down for a bit? Were you taking on fewer clients or things like that?
Yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, deal flow definitely slowed, and it's kind of what you would expect. Most of the larger funds just sort of hunkered down. And it's like, no new investments. We have to make sure our existing portfolio survives. We're keeping all of our dry powder, and we're going to go back, kind of carefully review our existing portfolio, you know, make some hard decisions, kind of triage which ones we're going to continue to fund and which ones we're not. And we're not going to look at a whole bunch of new deals at the moment, right? Because survival is kind of the first order of business. And that was kind of in the beginning, in that sort of March, April timeframe, when everything just sort of shut down. But that quickly moved. You know, nothing's ever as bad as it seems. And then once investors sort of picked their head up and they realized, you know, that this from an investment standpoint, if you're a fund, you have to deploy your capital, right? You don't make money, you don't get paid if you don't invest. So after a couple of months of just sort of being hunkered down and finding it hard to find new lead investors pop their heads back up, and deal flow has pretty much returned to normal. Now, that's not to say there weren't some effects. We did have companies where term sheets got retraded at the last minute, right? So they had a valuation, but then the investors were, I don't know if you even want to call it opportunistic, it's probably just fair, where they came back and said, sorry, it's a pandemic, those terms don't apply anymore. If you want our money, we just cut the valuation, by 30%. That's unfortunate, but that was the environment that we were dealing with. The other thing, we've actually been really busy, but I will say the deals that are closing now, for the most part, we closed 3 deals in the last 3 weeks. One of them actually raised more money at a higher valuation. So that's sort of a good sign that there's still good investor appetite out there, and deals are definitely still getting done. But those conversations actually started pre-pandemic. So it is much harder now if you're just going out and raising capital from sort of standing still. It is tougher than it was pre-pandemic, but it is definitely coming back. For the last cohort we just put through Dreamit, we had record investor engagement. Typically our companies will get 20 to 25 meetings with investors. That would be an average. This last cohort, an average of 36 meetings. Now, I think part of that was because we went virtual. So the investors were at home and they're like, yeah, I don't commute. I'm in front of my computer. I've got all day, line them up. I'm happy to talk to lots and lots of companies. On the other hand, what did change about our model and made it harder was customer engagement, right? We pride ourselves on getting access to enterprise healthcare systems, and that got pretty tough for a while, because a lot of our big enterprise healthcare systems partners, they were all COVID all the time. And I was like, hey, we've got these awesome 7 companies that would love to meet you. And they're like, yeah, talk to the hand. In fact, that same innovation leader I was telling you about from Atrium, who's been an amazing Dreamit supporter for a very long time, I talked to him. I'm very good friends with him, called him up. Hey, how about we set up, another, we call customer sprint. We'd love to have you talk to this cohort. He's like, look, I love Dreamit. I love your companies. I am spending my entire day sourcing ventilators. I'm sorry that I just don't have the time right now to engage with exciting startups, even though they might be solving real problems that my system cares about, just not right now. And it does feel like we're starting to come out of that. I think a lot of healthcare, it's so some of it's geographic, right? So it really depends how severe COVID is impacting your region. And some of it is, it seems like a lot of healthcare systems are accepting this as the new normal. And so it's like, okay, this isn't going away anytime soon. We still have all these other problems we had before the pandemic. We can't ignore those. If you have platforms and solutions that address those problems, we're now willing to re-engage with those companies and have the conversations. But the big difference is budget. That's the issue. It's like, yeah, we have a problem. You have a cool platform, decision support by the bedside, so that we can, we can make better decisions. We get it. We just don't know how we're going to pay for it. Because if we're a large enterprise healthcare system, there's a good chance. Hopkins was losing $100 million a month for a while. So it's like, nope, there's no discretionary budget for anything. People are just worried about keeping their jobs. It really changes sort of the appetite for innovation within those healthcare systems. But I do think there's cause for optimism. It does feel like systems are starting to come back to the table now and re-engage with exciting startups.
Adam, I got a quick question. You mentioned that you often work with companies that in the form of a co-investor. So you want other investors that are interested in the company as well. So we recently got involved in some diagnostic technology, and one of our plans was to approach BARDA or the Department of Defense initially to try to get funding to help move the technology along towards productizing this diagnostic technology. So would Dreamit fit in with that type of development process and be part of it at the time of BARDA funding, or would they come in afterwards if there was interest, or before that type of funding?
And what does your company do, Kevin? Or what's
so we've got a partnership with a biosensor company in Ohio, and we've been involved in evaluating technologies to develop diagnostics and biosensors. And this recent technology has the potential to become a diagnostic for viral detection. So it may have potential in things like COVID-19 or seasonal flu or pandemic flu. So we're in the process of discussing the licensing terms and that whole due diligence, but we're also looking at where the funding might come from as we advance this further.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, I mean, so again, our model is we want to work with companies when they're at that either launch point, early launch, or they have clear line of sight to commercialization. So if the technology is at that point, then that's when we really get interested. The BARDA is awesome. Like, they've funded several Dreamit companies. It's a great way to raise capital. We're typically looking to co-invest alongside of a lead institutional investor. So BARDA doesn't really fall into that category. They're looking more at the science of what you're doing. It's more like a grant application, as opposed to an institutional investor who's really looking at the commercial potential, of the platform. And they've typically done a fair amount of due diligence on your company before they write a check. That's part of the reason we like to co-invest, and our model is co-investing, is we don't have the bandwidth to do that due diligence. We do light due diligence before we invest, but we're really leaning on a larger fund typically, not necessarily larger fund, but a fund that leads rounds, and relying on their due diligence to figure out what the fair valuation of the company is, what the terms of the deal look like, and then it's at our option as to whether or not we want to participate into that round. So if the platform you're talking about is either in the market or at least is far enough along that you have some data that kind of validates the commercial viability of the platform, we're happy to talk to anybody early. Even if it's not at that point yet, it's great to start the conversation, get to know each other, and then, it's like any relationship, right? You want to build it up over time. It's same thing with any investor, right? The time to show up to an investor is not like, hey, nice to meet you, I'm raising my Series A. Like, that should never be the first conversation with any investor. Often it is, but it shouldn't be, right? You should be talking to investors months, even years in advance, which is, I'm not asking for anything from you right now. I just want you to know I'm building this awesome company. Is it okay if I send you quarterly updates on our progress? Yeah, of course. Like, fire away. Love to hear how you're doing. Well, 12 months of progress. Every quarter, these guys seem to be crushing it. They're hitting their milestones. That's a company I'm excited about. So when they do show up for their late seed or their Series A, the investor already knows them. Investors are already excited about them. I think a lot of founders don't spend near enough time sort of in that business development process with investors. But it's so important. One of these another Dreamit company that just got funded. I was talking to the CEO a couple of days ago, and he said that he had been talking to the lead investor group. They just did a great financing. But he said he'd been talking to most of those investors for a year. So that's just, it's really important to start those discussions early. A little hard to know, I will say with diagnostics, to be very transparent, the bar is higher. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Diagnostics they're harder to finance for a bunch of reasons, but they're sort of one step away from the therapy. And then the therapy is generally what drives the outcome. So if I have a therapy or an intervention, hey, it works or it doesn't, and I follow the outcome. But as you know, with the diagnostic, it's like, okay, so you're giving me new information. Now, how do I use that information, then drive a better outcome? So it just tends to be a little bit longer of a development cycle to get to commercialization, which is why a lot of institutional investors have shied away from diagnostics. We haven't. We've done diagnostics. Group K is a really good Philadelphia company. Probably most of you know Group K Diagnostics. You know, it was spun out of Penn Medicine, or Penn, I don't know if it's Penn Medicine, but anyway, so we will do early stage diagnostics, but we are pretty selective.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Adam, I had a question for you. I was curious, you know, if a team or an individual comes to you and, you know, they're at that stage where they've, you know, proven some traction and that they are commercially viable, are there any personality traits or anything, personality wise, that might prevent you from working with someone, although, you know, they've proven some viability and it's an interesting product that you would normally be involved with?
Yeah, of course. Look, it's very cliche to say it's always about the team, but of course it always is about the team, right? Because at the end of the day, that's who you're betting on. And, you know, we'll take a great management team with a mediocre technology all day over the opposite. I mean, it really is about the team, and every startup pivots multiple times along the way. So it's about how smart and flexible the management team is. And that also involves, you know, I would say the most common reason we say no to a company that looks really good on paper, it is the management team, and it's usually the coachability of the management team. And that reveals itself very early in most conversations. And I mean, it's likability and coachability. And even sometimes, in fact, quite often in a single Zoom call, we will hang up and just look at each other and go, yeah, not coachable, right? This is not somebody we can coach. Chances are there's usually something, there's almost always something that they do that reveals that. And then they're not likable either, right? And life's too short. I mean, nobody wants to work with people they don't like. You know, I don't know if you guys know Brenda Gavin. She was a very renowned venture capitalist in Philadelphia. She started Quaker. She started SR1. She died a couple of years ago, very unfortunately, unexpectedly, but one of the classiest, smartest women you've ever met, super, an iconic venture capitalist. And she used to say that the 7 most important words in business are: never underestimate the importance of being liked. And that has stuck with me my entire career. She told me that 20 years ago, and I have burned that into the brains. Like, you can literally wake my kids up in the middle of the night and say, what are the 7 most important words in business? And they will know it cold. Because likability is so important. And there are some founders that there was a young woman started a perinatal platform. And I remember when she pitched us, we're like, oh, this is kind of a mess. Like, we got the market opportunity. The solution was not well vetted, but she had the gift of likability. Like, in one phone call, everyone was like, we just want to help her. Like, she has this amazing vision. She's somebody we really like. We want to work with. It's somebody we really want to succeed. You know, it's a subjective kind of vibe or feel you get when you talk to founders. But think about this, and I thought about this a lot after talking with Brenda, and she said, well, Brenda, if you don't like them, you know, that a lot of people succeed in spite of themselves. But then I was thinking about this, like, so why? And what Brenda said was, when she looked back at all the deals she did with companies where she didn't like the founders, most of them were not successful, right? Versus where she liked the founders, her return was much higher on those companies. And I started thinking about that, and I thought, you know, it kind of makes sense, right? Brenda was like the easiest person to get along with, really smart. And I said, well, if Brenda didn't like them, chances are other people didn't like them. And if other people didn't like them, they didn't want to help them. And I could tell you, you cannot build a startup without a lot of help. You're gonna lean on a lot of people along the way and ask for a lot of favors along the way. And people are only gonna do that stuff, bend over backwards, make that extra phone call, send that extra email if they like you. And so, yeah, it surprises me. I mean, we did a phone call not too long ago with a startup, and I can tell you within 20 seconds, we knew we were not going to fund this company. 20 seconds. Never met this guy, young, let's say he was an early 30s founder, really interesting platform. In the beginning of the call, in the first 20 seconds, he said the following. We were a couple minutes late to the call. Our bad. You know, that's not acceptable. I mean, you should be on time for your calls. We got hung up. We apologized right at the beginning of the call. And the first thing he said was, I am really busy. Can we please get this started? It's like, we're done here. We're done. I don't want to work with you. Like, if that's your attitude, we're done. And the call only proceeded to go south from there. I mean, it only, you know, sort of an abrasive personality. But, you know, you get put in the life's too short bucket when founders sort of act that way. So anyway, Jake, that was a very long-winded answer to what other things do we look for in the management teams, aside from the the market and the platform.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's always a good reminder to have those soft skills with you as well. So we are coming up on our time. If we have any final quick questions, we can squeeze those in. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you, Adam. Really appreciate you taking the time out for us this morning and providing all this insight. It's been really illuminating, I'm sure, for everyone here.
No, it was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Glad to do it. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, please send me a LinkedIn request. You know, my email is really easy. It's adam@dreamit.com. Always delighted to connect with new startups. And so, yeah, and go to dreamit.com. Again, a lot of great content there for startups. Dreamit Doses, we do Dreamit Lives where we interview really interesting entrepreneurs and VCs. So I think there's worthwhile to, if you're not already sort of following us, it's probably worth the time. So, hey, it was really nice meeting everybody. Thanks, thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Awesome. All right, thank you, everyone. And yeah, I'll be sure to include Dreamit's website, Dreamit Dose, and the follow-up email, as well as Adam's contact info. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll see you at the next session. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Jake.